Hello, Chisom. Are you there?
Uh, Yeah, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. Please confirm that you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, okay.
The stage
So,
is set aside.
okay. So today we'll be talking about how you can safeguard your digital assets as an organization, and then the kind of things that you should look out for, maybe when you are making plans to safeguard the assets. So our agenda would be, we talk about disaster recovery, we look at the moving parts for disaster recovery, and we'll also talk about how you should weigh risk when it comes to your applications or your servers or whichever data that you need to protect, and then how you could deliver modern data protection that will meet your organization's needs. So for starters, let's imagine that's a Tuesday evening, and then you are kind of heading home from work, or you're about to close from work, and then all of a sudden it starts raining heavily, the type that carries people's umbrellas away and all of that. And then you, as usual, close from work and try to find your way home, which you do, and then you come to work on maybe Wednesday morning, and the first thing that you notice on your server is error messages. And then you're having all types of error messages on your different servers for one thing or the other. And then you're trying to bring back the server up, and then you discover that, oh, that all your efforts are proving abortive and that the server is not coming up. And then you're maybe talking to your colleague and trying to explain, you're like, oh, where's the backup? And then the backup is on the same server that's already crashed. I don't think that would be a nice experience for anybody. So in some cases, either the backup is on the same server that's crashed, or in maybe there's no backup, or even in some instances, when you now try to restore the backup that you previously have, you now discover that, oh, these backups are not even valid, or these backups won't even work for what we want to achieve. And then you go on a long chase of looking for a fix. So I'm sure it won't be a pleasurable experience for anybody, but the truth is that it could happen at any time and to any organization. So disasters could happen. In fact, disasters happen all the time. There's even maybe a global disaster last week Friday that kind of took a lot of organizations around the world by storm. And even up to now, a lot of organizations are still trying to wrap around being able to recover from those disasters. So most of the time when we say, oh, safeguarding your digital assets or safeguarding your data, most times the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, cybersecurity and all of that. So a lot of times people maybe tend to move towards the cybersecurity side of things a little bit more, and then fail to now look at things like, okay, how do we even ensure that if an incident happens that's not even a cyber attack, that we can still continue running our business, so that we can still safeguard our business from a negative event. So of course, disaster recovery is a portion or a section of security planning that basically entails the efforts that an organization will typically take to recover from a significant negative event. So a significant negative event can be anything. It can be a switch going out, can be a power issue, it might be a VM failing to boot up and all of that. And then as an organization, what you want is that the critical functions that the organization has can be quickly resumed. So I don't think any reasonable organization would want to say, okay, we want to plan, okay, if we have a disaster, maybe it take us 1 week to recover from it. And there are a lot of reasons that why that is not the case, as we will see as we proceed. So another portion for disaster recovery planning, or key section for maybe even infrastructure planning, would be business continuity. So as much as possible, yes, disasters happen and everybody has to accept that a disaster can happen at any time. But the key portion, or the key thing to note, is an organization being able to maintain essential functions while this disaster might be going on or even after it has happened, and being able to at least make sure that at least a number of their critical applications are still running while that disaster has occurred. And there are different reasons why disaster recovery would be important to any well-meaning organization. And one of them is everybody wants to be able to protect themselves against disruption to the business. And why is that important? So when your business gets disrupted, one of the things that would most likely happen is the ability of your organization to make money might be hampered in that time period. So maybe you are unable to, your key applications are not running, so maybe you're unable to carry out the normal tasks that are called for your business because the application is not running or is not running effectively. And most of the time, if at least I know for some organizations, when they're saying, okay, this is how many hours of downtime that we had because this application failed or because this server crashed. Another angle to look at it would be, oh, if the application was running, you would have made XYZ amount of money in that time frame. So, and then, but most times before these issues even come up, it might be maybe problematic trying to justify why you should have maybe a disaster recovery plan or a disaster recovery system in place. But once you can help your management or your organization see it's just like having an insurance plan, essentially, that, oh, if something happens, because, for example, all of us insure our cars or insure maybe, I think some people insure their houses against theft or even their places of business against theft and all of that. So you are not insuring because you expect that somebody is going to rob you or that you are going to have an accident with your car, then you need insurance. You're insuring because in the event, nobody's saying, oh, it's going to happen. But in the event that it happens, you want to have something to fall back on and something that would maybe reduce the impact of that negative event for your business. So another thing that disaster recovery helps you to do is also be able to retain customer confidence and to also improve the level of profitability that you could have. So for retaining customer confidence, all of us are Nigerians, and then we know that, oh, as a Nigerian, if I woke up in the morning and I heard, oh, so and so bank looks like their server has crashed or something, a typical Nigerian will do as much as they can to possibly move the money away from there, especially if they find out that it's actually true. Some people won't even wait to find out whether it's true or not. They will just immediately start attempting to move away their money and all of that. So typically, in the typical recovery timeline, you would have your application running normally or your server running normally or your workstation running normally and all of that. And then a disaster might occur. So maybe the server crashed or the application crashed or there was a power issue and then the server is unable to boot up as normal and all of that. So when that disaster has happened, you would obviously have maybe a period where none of the services are responsive. And then up until the point where you discover that, oh, something is wrong with this application or this server, and you start putting or taking action to resolve that problem. Up until you are able to get your organization or the application back to running at basic functionality. So in order to understand what your recovery plan might be like, it's important for us to highlight these two guys. So we first have why is it coming up on the straight line? Sorry. So we first have the recovery point objective, and then the second thing that we have is the recovery time objective. So recovery point objective typically is maybe the opposite of the amount of data that I can afford to lose. So if I can afford to lose 1 hour of work or 1 hour of data or 1 hour of transactions, that is what my recovery point objective would be. So I'm expecting that, okay, as an organization, in our worst case scenario, we can go back to 1 hour before this incident occurred, or we can go back to one day before this incident occurred. So that might be an acceptable data loss for your organization. So sometimes this data loss is also inferred on organizations by the regulator. So maybe your regulator has some requirements regarding data protection and all of that. So in some cases, you have to maybe adhere to the regulator's policies. And then in some cases, it's also forced on you by the nature of business that you are running. So for example, if you are running one form of fintech or financial service, or you are even maybe a bank, you can't tell anybody that you're doing one day of data loss. So you are maybe looking at having under 1 hour as the data loss period that you can possibly afford. So your recovery point objective is, if we have an incident or a disaster now, we are sure that we can go back 1 hour, or our target is that we are going back at least 1 hour at most, sorry, not even at most 1 hour before that incident occurred or before that disaster occurred. And then for recovery time objective, this will typically be how long it should take you to respond to an incident. So if, for example, you're an ISP or you're a provider who has maybe SLAs with your customers, your recovery time objective would also affect that SLA. So if you're saying, oh, we'll give you 99.99% of uptime, that means that extra 0.001 that you didn't add is the time that you've given yourself that if a disaster happens, that time should be sufficient. So if you are saying, okay, we have XYZ amount of hours in a month, it means the amount of total downtime that you can possibly even afford for the month is that 0.001. So this, your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective both play a consequential role into what your disaster recovery plan might look like, or what your typical recovery timeline would look like for your organization. And another key thing to note about this is the recovery time objective that you have, the shorter it is, the more expensive your data recovery plan might be to implement. So if you're saying, oh, we want to have 5 minutes, 5 minutes would mean that you probably have standby servers in a DR environment that's constantly waiting to handle transaction when the need arises, or you have live replication from maybe your production environment to the DR environment, and then there are also servers there that's capable of handling at least some portion of your traffic if a disaster were to occur. So the common challenges that organizations would have when developing their DR strategies: one, the cost to implement that strategy. Like I mentioned, the shorter your recovery time objective is, the more cost that you possibly have to achieve that recovery time objective. Then there's also the consideration that, okay, all areas need to be in sync with each other. So you can't maybe be making some plans without maybe some of the key stakeholders being involved in those plans. So if maybe I have an internal application that's being used by a particular department, and then as part of implementing our disaster recovery, we've made plans to fail over to a DR location, there's also a need for the affected stakeholders to be aware of the modalities of that failing over, and then what the standard procedure should be if there's an incident or if there's a disaster. Then there's also being able to identify risk and deciding on a location that would be appropriate for you. So coming down to the moving parts of your disaster recovery plan, we are going to liken this to having a car, and then, or use having a car and then your tire, and getting a tire puncture, and then the actions you could possibly take from that situation to define what the moving parts of your disaster recovery plan might look like. So of course, there's first option, which is no spare tire. So you've gotten a tire puncture, and then you're trying to figure out what next to do. Obviously, you won't be able to drive a long distance with that tire puncture. So most likely you would stop the car. In stopping the car, there's no backup, there's no spare tire and all of that. So there's no spare tire. And then you have to call somebody to maybe procure a spare tire in that instance, or somebody to assist you to resolve the issue that or the challenge that you're currently having in that period. And then the other part is you don't know how long this recovery is going to take. You don't have any control over how long the recovery is going to take. So if you had an application and then for one reason or the other, the application crashed, in this instance, you don't have any backup. So you might have to reach out to one vendor or the other, or one OEM or the other, to assist you in recovering from the disaster. And then there's also the side of, okay, the application has to stop as a whole. And then if that was a critical application or had a critical function to play for your organization, that would also mean that for that time period, those functions cannot be carried out. Then the last part is like stuff. So in Lagos here, imagine that your car stops with a tire puncture and you don't have a spare. It's either some nice looking young men are going to come and meet you, or LASMA or police. So there are so many things to contend with. So that type of scenario would be tough for someone to deal with. So the next type is you have a spare tire and you also have a replacement kit. So you have all the tools you need to change your tire, which is better than not having a spare tire in this scenario. So sorry, someone saying something. Okay.
You can continue, Chisom, yeah.
Okay. So in this case, you have a spare tire and replacement kit. You have the ability to recover from the incident. So you can stop the car, replace the tire yourself, and continue your journey as it were. The only difference in this case is, yes, the application still went down, which might be acceptable or might not be acceptable in some cases. So the application still went down. You still have to deal with that. You still have to do like a post-mortem to explain all that has happened. And then maybe you had an LTO and then an RPO and a time to meet up with it and all of that. And then you are able to get the application to continue running essentially, even though, yes, it will take some time. And then in practice, it might look something like this. So you would have your environment, your backup server.
Hello, Chisom. We seem to lose your screen.
Sorry, can anybody still hear me? I think
Yes.
my network briefly went off, so let me just reshare my screen again.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah, you're up.
okay. So I'm talking about the scenario where, yeah, so I'm talking about the scenario where you have a spare tire replacement kit, and typically in practice, it will look something like this. So you'd have your environment, maybe workstation, servers, and then your hypervisor, and then some virtual machines as well. And then you would have your backup server, then you could have different storage medias to store the backup. You could also make use of maybe even cloud storage if you wanted to, and all of that. So meaning, yes, if an application goes down, you have the ability to recover the application. All it will take will be time, but you have the ability to recover the server and recover the application at least to an acceptable state. So the next is that you use run flat tires. So you have a tire puncture, but you can continue driving. All is good, all is well. Then we're moving possibly to the permanent side. So your application is still running, your trip is still running. One of the differences there is that, yes, eventually you need to stop, but most likely you get where you're going to and then stop and then start making arrangements to fix the puncture. So another angle to it is the cost. So if you're looking at it from a cost perspective, run flat tires are more expensive than normal everyday use tires. So and then once you factor in that cost, sometimes you might just feel, well, how many times will a puncture occur in a year or in 4 years? I can continue with my normal tire. One run flat tire will buy me maybe 2 normal tires and all of that. So typically in your environment, it will look something like this. So you'd have your production environment, and then you would also have a DR environment. So in this case, your plan is that if something were to happen in production, traffic can be redirected, possibly through the use of a load balancer, to your DR environment. So it maybe reduces your recovery time objective to as low as 5 minutes. So it looks like a blip instead of a serious incident. But then at the end of the day, you still have to come back to figure out what happened in production and possibly get your production back running optimally. So weighing risk. So how do we weigh risk? Because it's obvious that we can't do maybe live replication for all the applications that we run, or for all the servers that we run, or for all the user workstations and all of that. So how do we weigh which one is more important? How do we weigh what actions we should take to secure this data or to secure our data? Especially considering that, yes, our budgets are not unlimited. I don't think there's anybody here that has an unlimited budget. But if you have, you can tell us so that we can become your friends. So given that we all have limited budgets, we also need to be able to cook within the budget. So if you were running a restaurant and you had 100,000 to cook food in a day, okay, I can only cook food of 100,000. You will not buy tomato 70,000 and rice 30,000 and now forget to buy oil and onions and the other things. So you need to cook within the budget. So if you have a budget you're working with, you need to ideally make plans within that budget and be sure that, yes, you're still getting value for your money. Then you would also need to decide, okay, which data is critical? What should we look at protecting? What will be the possible most serious pain point that we can have if our infrastructure were to go down? Then which application is critical, which data is critical? I mentioned that already. And then what is ideal? So given our nature of business, what should be an ideal situation for our organization? And then does the regulation say anything about making this type of plans? So after we've maybe reviewed the moving parts and then the risk that we need to weigh in deciding what our disaster recovery plan or structure should look like, we then need to look at the reality of backup today. So one of the things with backup today is that, as much as we don't like, for a lot of organizations, about 37% of all backup jobs fail. And then you also need to factor in the fact that most of these backups are even done manually. So somebody has to remember that, oh, before close of business on Friday, I need to back up this application to maybe a hard drive. And then sometime in future, the reason I'm backing this up is that I want us to be able to recover from maybe a potential outage and get the server running back optimally and all of that. But in reality, 34% of all restored jobs also fail. And most times there's no way to know ahead of time because you don't get to figure out when you're going to have a disaster until the disaster has happened. And that leaves a lot of organizations with about 58% chance of failure in recovering their data. And that will mean that, yes, it's time for organizations to look for data solutions or data protection solutions that are modern and can cater to the needs of a modern organization. So one of the things you should look out for if you are in search of such a solution is, one, the solution needs to be scalable. You can't say, okay, because we have only 10 workstations now, if we were to have 100 in future, this will no longer serve us. So one of the things you are looking out for is a solution that you can scale, that will still give you speed and then is reliable, and then you can optimize for time, cost, and storage. And then most important of all is being able to have granular and whole site recovery options. Why is this important? There are instances or there are cases where you might not need to recover all the files that were on the server. You might just need a specific file, or you might need a specific file that was in a workstation to maybe hand over back to the user. It might also be an email. You might just need a specific email. So why should I recover the whole mailbox when I can possibly just get out a single email that is maybe important at that time? And that also factors in, okay, reducing the time for recovering data from your backups. So the promise that modern data protection gives all organizations is, one, they can become data resilient, and we guarantee that yes, we'll be able to protect every workload that we have. We can reduce our operational costs and also ensure guaranteed recovery. So aside that, oh yes, there's some level of trust. We can trust that the data is protected from ransomware. We can increase accessibility to data. And then if need be, because I think these days compliance is becoming extremely important for organizations, we can also control compliance and governance. Then the last promise is data dexterity. So I can reuse data. I can restore the backup from maybe even my production environment to a test environment to allow our developers or our QA team to test the application or test a new rollout that they have planned using something that's close enough to our current real-world experience. So for backups, most of the time, what you want to be able to have is, as a best practice, to follow the 3-2-1 backup rule. And that rule states that you should have 3 copies of your backup. 2 of them should be stored on 2 different media, meaning if you're using NAS, you can also use tape, and then 1 should be an offsite copy. So what this ensures is, in worst case scenario, you have an option. So anything that happens, you shall have an option that you can recover back from and get your organization running back smoothly. So one of the reasons why, at least the reason why we've seen that this is important is, so earlier this year, there was, I think, an insurance provider in either Australia, so I can't remember the exact country, who their cloud tenant accidentally got deleted from one of the cloud providers' environments. And this deletion was permanent. There was no way to restore anything. Everything was gone. There was no account to even log into. Servers were gone. Everything just disappeared. And nobody could even explain what had happened. And these people have been using this service for years without having any issue. And then all of a sudden, one morning, servers were gone. Nobody could even log into the cloud tenant to even start checking what had happened. So servers were gone, data was gone, backups that were stored within the cloud provider were also gone. So their saving grace in this case was that they had backups that were stored at another location. So what he just took was to work with the provider to restore all the backups back to the provider's environment, and then they were able to reduce the extent of damage that had been done by that loss. So as a modern data protection solution, we'll be looking at Acronis. So Acronis allows you to do a number of things and cater to a number of data protection needs within your organization in as many ways as possible. So one of the things that you have is, yes, there's support for different type of products. You have support for Microsoft products. You have support for Office 365 or Microsoft 365, whichever one you prefer to call it. You also have support for Google Workspace. There's native support for EC2 instances, then Linux, MariaDB, MySQL, and SAP HANA. So you have a lot of options to work with, and then you can mix and match and figure out what level of protection that your organization needs and what best will suit your use case. So there's a base license that covers a lot of backup needs that every organization would have, which is being able to do file level, disk level, image and application backups, then being able to back up popular workloads like Windows, Linux, Microsoft 365, then having flexible backup storage options. So if you want to back up to, you want to use AWS S3 as a storage location, you are free to use that. If you prefer to use a Google storage bucket instead, you're free to use that. If Azure is your preferred provider, you're also free to use that. If you want to use a local NAS within your organization, that also works. So you have the ability to mix and match and also work within the budget that you have available to you. Then you could have immutable backups, you could have archive encryption, and then you could also implement incremental and differential backups. So one of the key reasons why having incremental backups is that for organizations, instead of having to take a full backup every time, you could take incremental backups and then occasionally take a full backup again. So the benefit of an incremental backup is it saves you the time it should have taken for that backup to complete or for that backup to run. So if, for example, a full backup would have taken 3 hours, an incremental backup might take as little as 5 minutes. And it will also help you to conserve resources, especially when it comes to thinking about bandwidth within your net, within your infrastructure and all of that. Then you also have the ability to do instant restore. So I can do like a click back on a system. Maybe the system doesn't even have, maybe the system has not gone out of commission and it's still working, but maybe there's a file that was accidentally permanently deleted and all of that. I can do an instant restore and get that file back to the system. I could also set up the system in a way that users are able to have the ability to self-service. So users can log in and then look through the backups and be able to recover whatever item they need, or whatever email or whatever file that they need back. And then for the advanced backup, this provides an extra layer of support for the other needs that your organization might have. So for example, if my organization needed to back up our Microsoft 365 accounts or resources, if we needed that backup to happen multiple times a day instead of once, the advanced backup might make more sense for us, because maybe because of the nature of our business, we need to maybe have the backups happen every 6 hours or every 10 hours, as the case may be. We can go for the advanced backup option because we're now able to back up multiple times and ensure that the window or the margin for error is reduced as much as possible. So I've already talked about the option for one-click recovery, Then there's continuous data protection, meaning that if maybe a system were to fail, if a backup was going on and all of that, you'll be guaranteed that to a large extent, users won't lose the work that they had in progress. And you can also control what you are backing up continuously. So for example, there might be instances where a user is working on a file and maybe their system just goes off and restarts. And then by the time the system is back up, they can't even find the file anywhere. Even if you try to check the typical location for temporary documents, you're even unable to find it there. So, but one of the benefits that the advanced backup license allows you to have is that you can also protect the files even between backups. Then for your SQL servers, you're able to have a cluster-aware backup that's also able to note when data may have moved from one portion of the cluster to another portion. And you can ensure that even at the point where you are restoring, everything will still be in the way it was or the way it was before the disaster had occurred. So the same thing also applies to SAP HANA backups, so you can ensure that you can recover your backups to even bare metal or different hardware, or even the same hardware, even to a virtual machine, if that was what you needed at that particular time. And then you can be guaranteed that you would have backups that are consistent or that are persistent for the storage of your SAP files. So another benefit for the advanced backup license is that you would have the ability to have insights into what your compliance might be for your data protection. And then you can also map out what is maybe most important, and also discover files that might not currently be protected by the backup policy that you currently have in place. So for Office 365 and Google Workspace, you also have the ability to group users and manage manage the backup policies for those users by the groups that maybe you have assigned them to, and ensure that at every time you have a high level of consistency for the backups that are occurring within your infrastructure, within maybe your Office 365 tenants or your Google Workspace tenants. So I'd also mentioned this already, that you can also take, so another benefit that the advanced backup license allows you to have is that you also have the ability to back up as many times as you might want in a day, but up to 6 times in total for either your Google Workspace tenants or your Office 365 tenants. So in summary, Acronis is allowing you to get the data protection that your organization needs, either by increasing automation and productivity, or being able to deliver the most secure backup, or being able to protect more than one workload on different platforms at the same time. So one pane of glass to manage all of those backups. And yes, another key benefit is the extent of complexity is actually reduced a lot. So we have come to the end of the presentation. I don't know whether anybody has any questions from what we've discussed so far. Any questions?
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah, so you said something about three three how do I put that? 3 stages of backup, and you were referring to two of them, which has to be one offsite, then one on site, like a maybe say like a internal backup, So are you are you saying that because of the scenario that you painted, are you saying that it's always advisable for us to have that cold backup, which is the one internal and offsite, rather than have it on the cloud?
Okay, so for that portion, I was talking about the best practice. So the best practice is like you should have 3 copies of your backup. So of course, it's not everybody that might how do I put it? In practice, it might not be everybody who is having 3 copies of their backups. But what is important is you want to have as much options as possible. So one, obviously the one on site might be the closest one to you or the easiest one to recover from in case the servers or the workstations you wanted to recover were also on site, maybe at your production location. And then there are cases or there are instances that I've seen where even the backup that they had locally was also affected by whatever issue affected the servers or affected the application. And then maybe the backup is gone and there's no way to, so that is effectively like putting all your eggs in one basket. So you don't want a situation where maybe all your eggs are in one basket and then you're trying to now grapple with so much issues at once. So as maybe a best practice, you should look at having maybe also using different media. So it's not compulsory like must be only maybe network attached storage. It can be tape, it can be what they call it. It can be tape, it can be cloud storage. But what you are just trying to achieve, the long and short, is just to make sure that all your eggs are not in one basket and then you have multiple options in case there's an actual incident. So I think I saw one more question in the. Okay, so for the pricing, I might not be able to share information on what the pricing is, but you can always reach out to either sales at caspertechng.com and they'll be able to provide you with at least an estimate of what the pricing might be like. So part of the reasons why I can't give that is I know the pricing also works based on the number of seats that you're buying at once and then the mix and match of what you're paying for. So if you were paying for maybe Office 365 protection and all of that, so there are many factors that go into deciding what the pricing might look like. Then I think someone had their hand raised. You can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, Chisom, I think there's another question in that chat function from same Oludarush. So he's trying to guess if there's any form of cyber insurance stipulated in the SLA.
For that, I'm not sure, but I'll need to check again. I'll check, but I know there's how do I put this? You have some extent of cyber protection built into the backup infrastructure. So as the backups are being taken, it's also being scanned for malware and all of that. But I don't know whether there's cyber insurance built into it, or I can quickly look that up and get back to you. Any other question?
Okay, hello Chisom. Thanks for the lecture. I just wanted to clarify because in my environment, they don't allow us to put data on the cloud. So we can't really do a backup on the cloud. But with your solution, does it guarantee or does it bridge the gap between backup and then business continuity? No, backup is short term, business continuity is long term. So me using your option, will it help me bridge that gap where I don't have to find a separate solution business continuity?
Yeah, so it will depend on maybe the scope of what your business continuity needs are. So for example, for some organizations, the scope might be that, okay, we want to have a DR site, maybe at a co-location center and all of that we are sure would have a reasonable amount of uptime or be available most of the time. And then if there's an issue, we want to fail over to that location. So that is one reasonable scope. So in some other cases, some people have a scope that involves maybe having another location where people can also work from if the primary location is not available. So I've seen instances where people have a separate location that's like a workspace that is directly linked maybe via MPLS to the DR location. So if there's an issue, people can still go to that BCP office or BCP location and continue doing, at least the critical staff can still go to those places and continue doing whatever work that is required to ensure that the business continues while maybe recovery actions are still being taken for the production environment. So like I said, it will depend on the scope of what your business continuity plan looks like, which is why part of what we tried to highlight was to look at, okay, all the different portions that you might need to think about when planning or when making such preparations for your organization. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, yes, he answers the question.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out to join us today. I think before I officially thank everybody, maybe I should do a quick recap of what we've talked about today. So we've talked about disaster recovery and why it's important for your organization to have a disaster recovery plan in place, and not just having the plan, but being able to implement that plan. We've also looked at all the moving parts that you might have for that plan, which would include which resources might be more important than the others, what plan do we exactly as an organization intend to have. So of course, we looked at 3 options, which is having a code recovery option. So in that option, maybe you don't have a backup, there's no spare, there's nothing in place. So when the issue occurs, you have to start reaching out to different people to get your business running up to speed. But as you may have discovered, that is not ideal for any organization, because it would simply imply that your organization might be unable to deal with challenges or disasters that might occur, and it might also cost the organization in the long run. So yes, having a spare is a better option, and also having the replacement kit for that spare. So even if I have a spare tire, I want to be able to have all the things I require to remove the punctured tire and replace it, so that we can continue our journey and get to our destination and also achieve the goals that we have as a business. So yes, that option is still good. Best option is maybe using run flat tires. Using run flat tires would mean, oh, no matter what happens, that trip or that journey is going to be completed, and we are sure that yes, if anything happens, nothing spoiled. We'll still work and do what we need to do, and the business would not suffer significant damage as a result of a disaster, and then we can get the business back up to speed as soon as we're able to figure out, yes, what also happened in production and all of that. So we've also said that Acronis is a modern data protection solution that would cater to your needs and can cater to different type of workloads. So whether it is you want to back up resources from your Office 365 tenants, maybe your SharePoint, OneDrive, or even emails. You have the ability to do that. And another key benefit is, yes, you can do both file level restores, which are granular. You can do a restore of the whole. You can also do a full restore of the whole backup. Or if what you needed was just maybe a specific file or a specific email or a specific document, you can also go ahead and do just that. So if you have any other questions or there's any other inquiry, you can feel free to reach out to our sales team, which is sales@caspertechng.com. Which is sales@caspertechng.com. Sorry, my screen sharing just stopped abruptly. Okay, with that being said, thank you for taking time out to join us today, and we hope to hear from you soon.